Welcome to this episode of The Cwic Show. Today we're going to be talking about the disciplinary counsel of Natasha Helfer. Now, typically I would not bring something like this up, but she's been very, very public about this. A lot of interviews. She's done her own YouTube video. It's all over social media. And the Washington Post did a write-up on this. Actually, a very well-written article. So at this point, it's kind of, it's public knowledge enough that I feel comfortable in doing this. What I do want to say is I do not want to demonize Natasha Helfer, right? She seems like a lovely woman, seems like a very nice person. And my guess is, as a therapist, that she's done a lot of good for a lot of people and really helped a lot of people. And so I think for that reason, she's got kind of a lot of support behind her in this disciplinary counsel. Now, I don't know what's going to happen from this. This is not an episode that's about whether or not, not specifically whether or not this is something that should, the hammer should come down on her or anything like that, right? I'm not the judge of that, but because it has to do so much with the church and because she's been so public against some of the teachings of the church, I think it's important for us to see something. And more importantly, beyond her, right, in this scenario here, what I want to talk about is actually where it seems to be that the church is. And she brought up publicly an example of Galileo, right, where it's science against religion. And that basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but that basically the church lags behind science, and the science that she has informs her that she needs to publicly advocate her position as a therapist, as a professional, and that position is contrary to what the church teaches. And she's not shy about it. There's just some principles here that I think, number one, where it's appropriate, I want to defend the church. And you know what? I'm just surprised that there's not more voices out there that are doing this. I don't understand it. I don't understand why we're not more concerned about some of these things that are cropping up. And I'm not talking about her specifically. I'm talking about some of these principles that I'm going to go over here that are very obvious and blatant and out there, and they are fighting strongly against the church. And we sit and watch this. I don't understand it. We don't need to demonize her, right? But I am going to go over her words, which are very public, and talk a little bit about those things and try to be somewhat intellectual about this and not intellectual, somewhat intelligent about this, and look at where the support's coming from and why. Because I think that these trends are something that are important for us to be aware of and to be able to grapple with in our minds on the forces that are fighting against the church. And if you have kids these are ideologies and ideas that are getting to your kids, I promise you, right? They're getting to your kids and members of your family, and they're not good. They're not good things, right? So they're couched in compassion, always couched in compassion. And so at first it sounds like a bumper sticker that means love and happiness, right? But that's not what it is, right? It's a Trojan horse. This is a statement that she made on this. She says, the reasons I'm being called to such a meeting all have to do with the fact that I am a mental health professional and certified sex therapist. Okay? So what she's doing here is she's pitting specifically her profession against the church. And this is a very conscious effort by her to do this. And she does this over and over again. Okay? And I am public and vocal about my stances, supporting and educating about sexual health. Well, thank goodness, right? I mean, you want experts on that, right? which it seems they do not see as within compliance with doctrine, with church doctrine. Okay, so that's the statement I want to open with here, because that's what this is about. It's about a movement, certain ideologies, and about the way she's using this as a Galilean example, with Galileo of how religion is fighting against science. I don't think that's the issue here, but not the primary issue, but it is an issue, and it's going to come up more and more, I think. And typically, right, I'm one that really wants to pull science and faith together. I think that they both have the same objective, but here they don't. This is not an example of that. Okay, so she talks about the letter that she received from her stake president that goes over 5 concerns that they have for her. Here they are. Number 1 is my support for same-sex marriage. Now, I think it's very important to understand that of the 5 points, this is the only one that has anything to do with the LGBTQ community, right? The only thing. But if you look at the support that she's getting, it's almost all focused on this, right? It's almost all focused on this. So that's a problem, because nobody's talking about everything here, right? Number 2 is masturbation, right? About 10 years ago, I think it was 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, she wrote a blog that was basically saying, look, this is fine, especially for kids. It's not a sin, right? It's not a sin. So this was something that's kind of her first foray into kind of going against the church and the doctrine of the church, right? And what does it have to do with? And this is the important issue here. It has to do with the law of chastity. Or it has to do with the law of chastity. That's the first thing with the law of chastity. Number 3, the stances on sexually explicit materials, pornography. I have been educating on the difference between a values model and an addiction model. So basically for her, under certain circumstances, pornography is fine and healthy. Erotic images and other things are fine and healthy. Again, what are we talking about? We're talking about the law of chastity. And it's not just something that she's even talking about in private with her clients, right? She's out there very strongly as a proponent of these things and very public about them. Number 4, critical of church leaders. Now, she denies this. That's not true. That part I don't understand why. I mean, just come out and say it, because it's very obvious on several occasions where she has by name called out the first presidency and gone against them in a very derogatory tone and approach in public meetings, right? And then number 5, concerns that I have encouraged people to leave the church. She denies that as well. And I'm not going to cover that at all because I have no idea if that's the case. I'm not judging her. I'm trying to judge her words and what she's gone and put out there publicly. That's what I'm looking at, right? Okay, so the 2 things really we're looking at here is the law of chastity. And then she's going to move in a lot on her statements as she does these interviews. And in the past, it has to do with, surprise, surprise, with social justice. And everything that encompasses, right? It's identity politics. It is about those that are marginalized. And again, I think she's probably helped a lot of them. I don't doubt that. I think she's very sincere in that way. And so I want to make sure that's clear. But this ideology is to me a religion. And it's a value system that is put above the church. And that is the problem. That's what's happening. Her values hierarchy, it is not with the church. Her values hierarchy is with her profession and with this movement of social justice that is starting to align much more with her profession, right? Okay, so why do I bring up victimhood with social justice? It's because it's about the shaming. That's her issue here. What's one of the things that she really brings up here? It's about what she sees as consequences in the church that are shaming individuals because of their breaking the law of chastity, that she thinks is not a sin and not a problem. So here's what she said on that. She said, after much education into all of these matters, I not only speak to my perspective, but also from personal conviction. Inappropriate shame harms people. Well, agreed. The question is, what is inappropriate and what is shame? To her, consequences in the church because of breaking the law of chastity, right, is shame. So if you can't take the sacrament one week because you've broken the law of chastity and you've gone to the bishop, to her, that needs to be eliminated. In fact, going to the bishop at all about breaking the law of chastity should be eliminated. Now, I'm not including adultery in that. I would guess she still believes that. But otherwise, to her, there's no reason for this because that's what her profession says. That's what she's calling science, right? The social science behind shame. Now, she's also said unnecessary sexual shame is a poison we all can participate in expelling. We see it in our churches. We see it in our political spheres and our legislation. We see it in our educational systems. We see it in our cultural norms and our family systems. You know, she wants to throw off what she sees as a medieval type of a Puritan, unnecessary sexual shame. And I'm sure there's some, ounces of truth in that. I think there are some ounces of truth in that. But not taking down the system. She's got a problem, obviously, with the law of chastity here. She goes on and says, our children and teens deserve a home where they are not shamed for their sexual feelings, thoughts, and actions. Right? So, again, it's shaming to her is consequences in the church. The idea that you even have to go talk to a bishop over something. And again, it's a matter of what is the law of chastity meaningful? Does it matter? It seems to me like it's one of the most important things that we can follow, right? I mean, it's a covenant. Now, maybe she doesn't keep this front and center for herself. I don't know, but these are covenants that we're supposed to keep, right? Commitments that we make. That for her are antiquated, right? They're old-fashioned. And again, I'm not trying to focus in on her, but I'm trying to focus on her words here and what she says. And then rounding out a little bit about this law of chastity here, she talks about an early part of her life, right? She says, early on, she grew up LDS. I was receiving a steady flow of abstinence-based, fear-based, and shame-based sexual education. So in other words, teaching kids that they should abstain from sex is harmful because when they do, it's shameful and they feel bad about themselves. It's a victimhood mentality. It's putting the blame on the church for we believe in the law of chastity. This isn't difficult. And of course, this is not talked about by her supporters. They never bring this up. She says, one of the experiences and messages that I was grappling with early on in life as a teenager is the one that taught that premarital sex was a sin and that it would separate me from the presence of God in my life and his continual guidance and protection. So again, for her, this should not be taught. Right? It's natural. It's what she calls normative behavior. And that we shouldn't be, the church shouldn't be shaming our kids, our teenagers, and our young adults because by teaching them that abstinence is good, right? That's antiquated and medieval. On another occasion, she said, there's room for casual sex. I'm not trying to shame that. Right? So again, she doesn't believe in the law of chastity. That's an issue here. And why do I bring this up? Well, it's not because of her, right? It's because this is where this attack is coming from. That's why I'm bringing this up. It's because her profession and many others don't believe in the law of chastity. We do. And yet she wants to change the church. She publicly denounces the church and its leaders because of her science, right? That is above the law of chastity. We should change and throw out the law of chastity is what she's saying. That's ultimately what it is. That's the conflict. They hit head on. Her words and the law of chastity hit head on. So the support for her, right, is I'm sure friends and family and other professional colleagues are supporting her. And again, she seems like a good person, right? I would love to sit down and have lunch with her, right? She seems like a really good, sincere person. So I'm not attacking her. I'm trying to separate these things between her words and herself, her value, her being, right? But the support that she's getting, and why is this important for you, by the way? Because this is the struggle in the church. This is the struggle for your families, for your kids, for your siblings, for your family members and your friends. These are the ideologies that are growing stronger and stronger. It is this whole academic, quite frankly, hydra that has all of these heads that are coming together, right? And forming this ideological force that is sometimes called social justice. And those that would fight against that would say, what? So you believe in racism, or you believe in homophobia, or no, of course not. There are ways to do this in a Christ-like manner, to reach across and to help others without having to demean the leaders of the church and the commandments, right? It's the commandments, and to eliminate the law of chastity, right? Those are not negotiable. Those are not issues that are negotiable. If you are a covenant path member of the church, those are not issues that are negotiable. So the support around her, and not all the support, right? I'm bringing up a few of the supporters here that are behind her. They don't bring up the law of chastity issues. They're not going to talk about those things, of course, because they know that you're not going to agree with that. So they're going to go to something else that is very effective for them, and that is the LGBTQ issue, which is a very tiny part of what the letter talked about, right? And even then, it was only same-sex marriage that it talked about, right? But that's what they go to, right? For example, I knew that this was going to happen, but like today, there was another interview that was put out there. It was actually chopped up from an interview last week. And of course, what's the topic? It's about her daughter who identifies as LGBTQ. And as if that's the primary issue here. It's not. That is not the primary issue. And the other one is that it's her profession, and we need these professionals, and absolutely we do. And it's framing the support for her as if the church is ignorant of certain things, and that she is a professional in this area, and therefore we should listen to her. But it doesn't address the fact that she is fighting on several different fronts against the law of chastity. I wonder why. Why wouldn't they bring that up? Here's from a feminist blog that's out there, and here's what they say. This is one specific blogger on this. She says, "I am sorry to report that another Latter-day Saint woman has been called to defend herself before a male disciplinary council as a punishment for expressing her opinion." So this is simply because she's expressing an opinion. That's not what it is. She's very blatantly out there going against the law of chastity and calling out by name the first presidency, right? I'll get to that in a minute here. They go on here with this and say, a marriage and family therapist who specializes in sexual health has been called to a church disciplinary council by one of her former stake presidents for professional opinions consistent with the literature within her field of expertise. Now, this is building up towards something that I really want to go over, this whole idea of science versus faith. Okay? So the person writing this letter or this blog of support for her is talking about, hey, the church, what are you doing? You're going against her profession, right? Doesn't matter about these other things, but hey, that seems to be the issue. You're fighting against her profession, okay? Sister Helfer, it says, also blesses our faith community by using her professional expertise to make suggestions about how we can make our church a stronger, safer, and more nourishing entity to support people like her clients in accordance with the scriptural counsel. And then they quote D&C 30:11, "You shall ever open your mouth in my cause." Okay, so you can see how this is, muddy. This is very muddy, right? She's certainly not supporting here in her words publicly the law of chastity in the church and others, and the cause of Zion in that case at all. They're not giving any specifics on what she has said. And they're talking about the literature that is consistent with her profession. Well, that literature is against the church that they're specifically citing. And there's a lot of literature that goes against what she's saying, by the way, that I've looked at, the studies that go against what she's saying. But there are studies that support what she's saying about masturbation and about premarital sex and even open marriages, right? So as that builds up and becomes more and more of a consensus within her community, within her professional organizations, is that something the church should just automatically go along with? And you know what? It's going that direction. So what are we going to see in the future with more therapists and those that are in counseling positions? Are they just going to pull from that instead of from the church? Yeah, it's an issue. It's going to be a problem moving forward here. They further say silencing people with her unique skill set instead of encouraging them to open their mouths, think about what she has said, is less likely that lay leaders and policymakers of the church will hear diverse insights with potential to benefit the work of the church. Okay, there's some truth in that. Right? There's some truth in that. I doubt that, I don't think that any of, for example, the First Presidency or the 12 Apostles have any background in therapy or counseling or psychology. Maybe they do. I don't know, but they may not. So it would be wise to gather experts like that. And I know they do that. They do that. But they're not going to say, okay, you know what? Sister Helfer, you're right. We need to get rid of the law of chastity. Let's just get rid of it because we don't want to shame anyone. We don't want anyone to feel bad for natural urges. That's basically what it says. And I would say to Sister Helfer, okay, well, what happened to bridle your passions? Right? I think that there is the problem here. The primary issue here is the law of chastity. Right? It's buffered. It is buoyed by the ideology of social justice, and everything that comes along with that is a part of the support for her. Right? Of identity politics, intersectionality, radical feminism, all of these things that are basically built on groups. That's what is buoying her up here, right? So the idea of faith versus science is going to be, I think, something that continues to be a problem, and it has been in the past for the church also. It's not like this is something new, right? It is. You have people that have believed in evolution and not believed in evolution. You've got leaders of the church that believe in evolution and others that don't believe in evolution, those that are more in line with science and others that aren't. But I don't care what the science says. Right, or the idea that because a lot of the science in her field is based off of, well, do I feel any harm from this? Well, you're going to feel bad. That's part of repentance. Is you need to feel bad and humbled by making a mistake. And what she's going to say is, well, in therapy, no, they should never feel that in the first place. Right? That's going to be a problem going forward, especially within this profession, this industry, right? So she brings this up herself. She says, the intersection between faith and science is an age-old story. And then she brings up the idea again of Galileo. And so she's basically saying, I'm on the side of science, right? You're on the side of medieval religion and faith, is basically how she's positioning that. Then she says this, and this is important, and this is understandable. This part is very understandable. I am bound by ethical and regulatory processes to bias my professional services through my own religious beliefs or background, right? To do that would be unethical, she said. I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that, right? It causes undue harm, okay, that I wonder about, and could get my license revoked. That's all very possible. So she's pitting her professional credentials against the law of chastity and saying that I have to advocate for this. And again, this is not just about what she says in private to clients. I don't think this would even be an issue if it was what she was saying privately to clients, right? It's that she's been so public about the whole thing. And there's more to it, right? There's more to it. So she goes on here and says a few more things. She says, this isn't about Natasha Helfer or about myself, right? She says, this is about clinicians cleaning up the bloody mess that we are leaving in the wake of our religious orthodoxy, when we are rigid. This is so textbook. This is nothing new. This is, and again, I don't think we should be rigid in any way. I mean, and of course, when you look at these things, what comes up in people's minds is the church lady, right? It's the most judgmental person in the ward. And that's not the way most people are. They're just not like that, right? And that doesn't mean that we get rid of discipline. It doesn't mean that we get rid of a bishop as the judge in Zion. It doesn't mean that we don't go through a repentance process. Because if you don't have the process of repentance in place, what good is the atonement? And therefore, what good is Christ? Quite frankly, what is the point? Going through a repentance process is a big part of the gospel. Remember those first principles and ordinances of the gospel? Faith, repentance. This whole idea that we're moving toward in Western culture of victimhood as a value, as a high value, in some cases, the highest value, is unbelievably damaging to all of us. And we've got to figure out a way to fight this off. We have got to fight off the whole idea of victimhood. We want to overcome. That's what Christ did. Being like Christ is not just saying, well, don't judge people like the Pharisees were. It's taking on everything. Look what he did. He took everything on. And then he beat it. Right? He resurrected with glory and with perfection. He was victorious over it. He didn't stay the victim. Right? He overcame everything. And that's what we're supposed to do. So if we're supposed to follow that example, we need to take on the burdens and we need to beat it. So we should be supporting each other in our afflictions and in our burdens, not to keep someone in a victimhood status, but to help them overcome. That is charity. That is love. And that is exactly the opposite of what she's talking about here. And then she goes further here with the science thing. She says, when a church which refuses to accept science, never mind that several of the church authorities have been scientists. And when she says church, sometimes she's talking about the culture. And certainly there are a lot of people in the church that don't fully accept science. In some places that are pretty proven, right? That's true. But you don't break down the system because of that. You don't take down the patriarchy, right, because of that. That is a cultural issue. But when a church which refuses to accept science, and by the way, there are studies that show that LDS members are some of the most educated of any religious group out there, period. Right? Education is a very high value for members of the church, broadly. Says that this discredits the people that can most help that community. So in other words, if you're attacking me as a professional, as a scientist, kind of is what she's saying, then I'm someone who can help the church, and that is true, but not the way she's doing it, not by breaking down the law of chastity, not by attacking the church publicly, right? This does not give you license to do that. If you want to help the church, talk to others, right? And say, well, what about this? You can't take your profession and put it above the law of chastity. That just makes zero sense. 2 Nephi 9:28, just to interject right here. When they are learned, they think they are wise, and they hearken not unto the counsel of God, for they set it aside, supposing they know for themselves. Right? I'm sorry, but that's what comes to mind when I think about this. Having a degree does not put you above the law of chastity. And a professional organization with a consensus that says that these things are okay and good, and it's going to move more and more that way, right, does not put you above the laws of God. It just doesn't. Now, last point I really want to make on this overall. Well, okay, it's not the last point, but something else I want to say on this is about there are therapists that are supporting her, and I understand that. I get that. It's like there is a bond there. They're all fighting for good things, or at least for the most part, they think they are. I think they're sincere. I think they're good people, right? These are sincere, good people that are on her page, right? But I want to bring up a couple things here again. We're talking about this whole idea of science versus religion. A couple more things that they are saying in support for her, right? And again, I think that they probably do wonderful things. They are in the trenches with people. I'm not putting them down. I don't want to do that. That's not what I'm doing. But the principles here are important. Here's what one said for her about her. It says, one thing I really have grown to love about social work, or being a therapist, is the huge social advocacy component, right? This is about social justice. The huge social advocacy component, and that I think is hard for me to, at times, because I tend to be more of an introvert and stand back and help in the background. But I think voices are needed, right? So again, this is going to the fact that, hey, Natasha, thank you for talking so much about this and for being an advocate for social justice. All right? It's the same thing that we see over and over again in the past where these things come up. They're putting that religion, that ideology above the law of God on this, right? I do appreciate this opportunity to speak up for our professional code of conduct. So that's more important than the church. That's more important than the law of God. It's more important than the law of chastity. That's the issue. That is the issue. Here's another one. We're not just private people, but our commitment to our code of ethics means that we actually engage in public advocacy. This is the same idea. This is not just the therapists, right? This is the whole idea of critical theory and postmodernism and anti-racism. It's all the same thing, right? Anti-racism is really not anti-racism. What is it? It means you can't just agree to have a loving heart and reach across races and have love between each other. You have to be an activist. And if you're not an activist, then you are a racist. And it goes all the way around, right? It's not just race. It's homophobia, right? It's misogyny. If you're not an advocate, in other words, it's not enough for this ideology to own your mind. They have to own your behavior. That's what it's saying. And that's the way all totalitarian states start. It's the same thing. It's just a little doomsday-ish, I know, but it's a bad policy. It's a bad ideology. It is cultish. It really is. And so they're supporting her, saying, we're glad you're being a public advocate for this, because that's what our calling is here in our profession, is to be a public advocate, right? Further on, she says, I think one of the reasons we're here is because we very much want to support one another in that public advocacy, even as it may seem to be in opposition to what we hear from the pulpit. Right? So they're conflicted on this. You can see it, but it's they're going with their profession over the church. That's what they're doing. I'm sorry, and these are people that work within the church. And again, I think they do a lot of good. I'm not here to judge them and what they do and all the work that they do. I'm not doing that. I might go to see them, right? And our family member might go to see them. I don't know, but what they're saying here is that the profession and the code of conduct and the ethics that they have with the profession is more important than the law of chastity. That is what is said when you break it all down. That's what they're saying. That idea of that activist approach is not a positive one. It creates massive division. That doesn't mean that the church doesn't need to change in some things, right? That's not the issue. The issue is, do you sustain the leaders of the church? You may not agree with everything, but do you sustain them? This is not sustaining, right? There's things that I don't agree with. And I don't go out and use the platform here that I have to go out and try and beat that pulpit, and try and say that we've got to change this with the church and calling out the church leaders. That is just that's not sustaining them. It's a bad policy, bad way to go, right? Now, lastly, what I want to say is what brings this together here, what brings this all together here is this idea, again, of social justice and authority. It's the whole idea of hating authority, bringing down the patriarchy, right? We don't want, anything that's in authority is colonialism, it's misogyny, it's the patriarchy, imperialism, right? Those are all words and concepts that have been used in totalitarian societies in the past, or that societies that have fallen to totalitarianism. It's all the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Here are a few things more that she had said here. It says, oftentimes with social justice or sexual health concerns, our church has used its revelatory power in ways that kind of lag with the times. What does that mean? They've used their revelatory power in ways that kind of lag with the times. So in other words, we need to be up with the times more than doctrine, more than the law of God, right? I see a values hierarchy issue here, right? Okay, so she's got a problem with some things. And I don't doubt that there are very legitimate things that she's got a problem with. I don't think we've always addressed the LGBTQ issue, for example, very well in the past. So there are problems there, but I think there's now a lot more effort in trying to help that out. But they're not going to change the law of chastity, right? That you're calling for the change of the law of chastity on this. And the other thing is that with this social justice and this pulling down of authority, the theme is we're not going to stop. We are not going to stop until you change these things. So when you think about those that are critical of the church or that are actively pursuing criticizing the church, we should understand it's not about just one issue. It's not about one thing, having women hold the priesthood or the LGBTQ issue. These issues will never stop. They'll never stop, right? Until the entire church has, for them, changed to, and probably not even then, right, to what is more along the lines of what they believe in. And that's not really how it works, right? We need to submit ourselves, broken heart and a contrite spirit, to the law of God. That doesn't mean the church is always right with everything. That's not what I'm saying. It doesn't mean that all their policies have always been correct. That's not what I'm saying. But in a relationship with God, right, we submit to him and to his law. And the law of chastity is not just a policy, right? It is a law of God, right? And so we get examples like this. Here's another supporter who says, we're not going to stop shining a light on this evil practice until it goes away, talking about church disciplinary councils, right? And then she says this, the church is not acting true. We're ostracizing people. Christ's message is all about non-judgment. No, it's not. Christ's message is not all about non-judgment. You can't just isolate the examples that he gives, especially with the Pharisees and with those that judged him at Jerusalem. He also gave commandments. He's also given commandments from the very beginning. So it's also about obedience, right? It's also about covenants. It's also about trying to progress to become more like him. And so you can't say that. You're isolating something really small. And it's not all about non-judgment. That's not what it's about. We need judgment. Some judgment. I mean, improper judgment is wrong, but you can't grow without judgment. There, you believe in justice. You're talking about social justice, so you obviously believe in justice. Judgment goes with justice, right? And anyway, a couple more here to finish off things that have been stated that I think are important here in terms of authority, right? And it's, again, this is all, let's go against the authority here of the church. Publicly, in a speech, she had said, I've been working with this population for over 20 years. So talking about the Mormon population. And again, I think she's probably done a lot of good things for a lot of people, right? Let's balance that. Let's keep that in mind. And then she says, of course, here, I have authority, to great applause, right? Because of her experience and because of her credentials, her profession. My authority comes from expertise. What is she saying? You might have authority, but my authority is more important. It comes from expertise here. And then she says, we want a place in a church where gospel principles and trauma-informed mental health standards are not in conflict with one another. Well, which do you think she wants to change? It's not the mental health standards, right? Our children and teens deserve a spiritual home where their worth is not measured by behavior. That is such an interesting statement. Their worth is not measured by behavior. And we should never teach that or say that or anything else. And I'm sure there's people that sometimes have said that, somehow implying that our worth is based off of our behavior. It's not. But our behavior is important. It's everything. The whole New Testament is about behavior. And it's about bringing on the doctrine of Christ within ourselves. So behavior is important. And if we have the wrong behavior, we need to try and change. Right? Not affirm the wrong behavior. Okay? And then she finishes off here in calling out each member of the First Presidency in a pretty derogatory tone, right? I mean, she's not happy with them. And says this, and this is the principle I think that we need to look at as far as this entire movement, right, of social justice or critical theory and postmodernism. That is honestly, it's a massive, massive threat to the church. We need to speak up more against this, and parse it out from our compassion, right? Compassion. You don't and judgment. We need to have better ways of doing this, right? It needs to be done under the law of God. It needs to be done in a loving manner, not in a way that is going to go against the laws of God. And there are organizations that do that. There are supportive organizations that do these types of things. Now, this was actually about the bishops and the interviews. And I would guess that they actually did change the policy, right? That this helped change the policy about interviewing one-on-one and allowing your parents to come in. And those are good things. Those are positive things. Again, I'm not This is not a condemnation, complete condemnation of everything. It's not. Again, I think there's good things that she offers here, and I think she's a good person. And again, coming to a close here, I want to make sure that that's clear. But I want to talk about these ideas, these principles, and we need to be aware of these things as they will continue to come to our families and our homes and to the church. And the science that she's talking about, I mean, I can go to Psychology Today, and here's a few of their headlines, right? An inside look at open marriages. New research offers a clearer picture of the pros and cons, right? So is that part of the science? Are open marriages psychologically healthy for couples? Eye-opening new research on alternative relationships. So again, the church and those laws, even though the policies may be changed from time to time, the laws of God are an anchor, and we need to hang on to those, and look at what some of these ideas are that are really challenging the church and challenging individuals, and be wary of them. They're easy to get sucked into because they always lead with compassion. And that's, it's going to pull on your heartstrings. And that's natural, right? But there's a lot more underneath there. And a lot more that is, again, like I typically talk about these things like there's a carrot that's going to draw you forward, but they don't show you the stick. And the stick is there. It really is. I'll talk to you next time.